My mother went missing Sunday, July 20 at 12:25 a.m. in the middle of the night. I know that precisely because I had a missed call from her. My mother and I have grown closer the older I've gotten, and we talked every day, at least for the past year and a half, every single day. I took a job transfer last fall, and for the month that I commuted 45 minutes each way, she was the first person I called when I got in my car to go to work, and she was the first person I called when I got in my car to come home from work. In the months leading up to my mother's disappearance, she seemed in good spirits. She was happier than she sounded like she'd ever been. The last time I saw my mother physically was a few years ago when my daughter graduated from high school. After that, she went on to have back surgery. I haven't seen her since because neither one of us were able to travel. She was telling me through the months how her back was getting better, and she seemed to be in a really good place in life. Her life wasn't always a piece of cake, but it did seem everything was getting better. She often told me stories about the dinner she ate with her husband. She cooked, but they were both retired, so they were able to go out and get meals. Because of her back surgery, she was homebound for a while, and she would always talk about what she was eating, what restaurants they were going to. I enjoyed hearing those stories. She loved my children very much. She loved hearing from them. When they would come home from work, she would immediately want to say hello to them. And she also had long talks with my daughter about life, living life to your fullest. In the first half of 2025, my mother had a series of doctor appointments. She was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis about 30 years ago, and therefore she had neurologists and regular doctors that she would go see for her checkups and her medication. In one such visit, they recommended a brain scan. If you're unaware of MS and what it does to the body, it creates these lesions. That's what her medical team was looking for, lesions in her brain. While she was waiting for those test results, her and her husband had decided to put their house on the market. They didn't like living where they were living, and they wanted to move for their final retirement days. The house they were in had previously been built about 2 years ago, so it was still brand new. I have a sister that lives in the southern states, and Mom decided she was going to pack up and move out there. So they immediately contacted a realtor, and the realtor started showing the house right away. Mom told me stories about the people who had come to look at the house, and there were many couples. After about the third couple came to look at the house, she told me that everybody loved the house. One potential buyer came to the house with his wife and brother. After the showing, Mom called me very excited. She said, "I think we have a buyer. These folks seem very interested." The brother that came with them was asking a lot of questions. The realtor said that was a good sign. Up until this point, she didn't have any offers on the house. During this time, my mother got her test results back from the brain scan. She informed me that they told her she had early stages of Alzheimer's. I asked her what that meant. She said, "Well, they saw some things in my brain." I said, "Well, Mom, I talk to you every day. I haven't noticed anything. Are they going to treat this?" She said, "Yes, they have medication and they're going to start me on it soon." I asked her for the name of the medication, and she did not share that with me. She said she couldn't remember it, but she would pull it out of her bag and find it and then let me know later. Summer months were approaching. I was busy with my family. We were getting ready for summer. We were clearing out the yard. We were doing things that you do in the spring. A few days went by, and I had not talked to my mother. I realized this and thought, oh, that's really odd because usually we call each other every single day. I called her to check on her to make sure everything was good. And she told me the story about how they had to call the police. I asked her what she meant, what police, who did you call, Mom? Please tell me what's going on. And she said the brother that came with the couple had been threatening them. She was very concerned because he had military training. I asked her how she knew this. She said, well, he told me when he was here. I said, are you talking about the couple, Mom, that really was interested in the house and the guy brought his wife and brother? She said, well, I don't know who the woman was. I said, Mom, you told me before that it was his wife. Well, I don't know if it was his girlfriend, but yeah, he came with a woman and a brother. Well, what did the brother look like? He was very young. He was very young. Well, how old were the couple? Well, they were probably 40s. And the brother was very young? Yeah, I would say about 22, right out of the military. Prior to this, she had been happy talking about this couple. And I said, well, what did the police do? I'm confused. And she said, the police came out and they told me there's nothing they're going to do, that I'm crazy. And I said, well, Mom, you're not crazy. What do you mean there's nothing they're going to do? What did the guy say to threaten you? How did this play out? How did this go down? He's got spy cameras outside on the trees. He's watching me. He took some stuff we donated to the thrift store and he planted it in my house. What kinds of things did he plant in your house? And she said, I had these bag ties saved from bread loaves and I put them in a baggie and they were in a drawer. Well, we donated them to the thrift store. I said, Mom, why would you donate baggy ties to the thrift store? Well, because I thought somebody could use them, but now they're back in the drawer. I said, well, did you simply forget and maybe not donate them? Or maybe your husband took them out of the thrift store bin and put them back in your drawer. No, he didn't do that. And there was some trash. Trash? The guy took the trash out of our trash and put it back in my kitchen. I said, well, what kind of trash? She got her husband on the phone. Her husband was backing up some of her statements and not others. So I thought, well, there must be some truth to this story, but I'm obviously not getting the whole scenario. I let it go because I didn't want to press her. She was obviously stressed. I thought maybe she was just too stressed with trying to sell her house. At this time, my daughter started driving lessons and she had enrolled in college. That classes would start in the fall. She had taken off a year or two from high school before starting college. So this was a big accomplishment for her. And we were all very proud of her, especially my mother. My mother got on the phone with her, praised her, encouraged her. I didn't hear from my mother for a couple of days. And then the next time I heard from her, she sent me a picture of a truck. She said it was a truck down the street where they lived at a dead end. And the truck had no license plate on it. And she was scared for her life. I said, well, what makes the truck scary? And she said, the man that got out of the truck, he went into the woods and she knew him from the house showing. It was the brother. I said, Mom, do you know this person's name? She said, no, I don't know his name. I said, oh, call the realtor and find out who this person is. And she said, I already did that. And they said they went through a different realtor. So she didn't have their information. I said, no, she can get that information. Do you know who the other realtor is? My mom said, no, I don't. I said, well, first of all, we need to find out the other realtor's information so we can get this guy's name because this is ridiculous. And she said, he's stalking me. He's in my woods watching me. I said, what are you doing right now? She says, I'm in the house. And I said, okay, just stay in the house. Are your curtains closed? She said, yes. I said, okay. And she goes, and I have to tell you something. And I said, what is it? This man knows where you live and he knows your name. I said, well, good, because if he's listening, then let me tell him this. Stop stalking my mother or you're going to have to deal with me. It's as simple as that. I thought that would help my mom kind of calm down about the situation and know that I'm really on her side about this and I'm not going to take this lightly. I don't live in the same state as my mother. There wasn't much I could do from afar unless I got on a plane and went down there and filed my own police report. It was unnerving to hear this man has my information, but I didn't really understand why or how. So I asked my mother, how does he have my information? And my mother told me, because he planted notes around the house and told her he's going to harm her, he's going to harm me, and he's bugged her phone, so he's listening to our conversations. Her husband was out in the yard doing yard work that day, and his brother stopped by to say hello. When they went up to the house, I asked to speak to her husband. But before I could get him on the phone, she told me that she was going to hang up with me and call the police because her husband doesn't believe the truck belonged to the man, but she knows for a fact it does because she just saw him get out of the truck. She also told her husband that the truck did not have a license plate on it. So her husband decided to walk to the dead end on the street where the truck was parked and look for himself to see if there was a license plate or if there was a person or what was going on. At the dead end of their street, there was a public fishing place. So anybody could pretty much park there and go fishing. It wasn't their private land. It was adjacent to their private land. My mom hung up the phone abruptly, and I didn't really know what was going on, and I didn't hear from her again for a few hours. I reached out to her to find out what had happened, and she said she called the police. And I asked her what happened. She said they came out, they looked at the truck. It did have a license plate on it. She doesn't understand why it didn't when she took the photo. The photo she sent me was a truck with no license plate on it. It was the back license plate that was missing. She said the police went down there, checked it out, and saw 2 kids fishing, 2 teenage boys. The police interviewed the boys. They didn't know anything about my mother or the circumstances. They certainly weren't the guy she described to the police. So the police had no choice but just to kind of like dismiss it. They went back up to the house and they told her, "We don't know what you're talking about. There's no guy out here running around stalking you. It's these 2 teenage boys that are just fishing. They're not harming you in any way. They're not out to get you." Her husband told the police he thought she was crazy. Her husband told the police a different story. He said that the brother that came out with the couple to look at the house was around 60 years old. He was retired military, but he never threatened them. Because of this, the police did not believe my mother. The police did not take my mother seriously. My mother continued to have house showings pretty much every day, sometimes multiple house showings in a day. She seemed like she was becoming paranoid every house showing. And it got to the point where she said enough is enough. She said she was going to call the realtor and break the contract because the realtor is the person who brought this man to the house who is now stalking her. And I said, "Mom, your husband told the police the man is not a young man. It's a man in his 60s and he wasn't stalking you." And my mom said, "Because he's trying to make me look like I'm crazy." The next day, my mom called me fearing for her life. She told me that there was evidence that this man had been there again. Her phone was hacked, and she was going to go to the phone store and get a new phone. A few days later, I kept receiving calls from an unknown number, and I don't answer unknown numbers. So I was hoping they would leave a message if it was a genuine person trying to get in touch with me. After about the 4th call, I reached out to my mother's husband, and I texted him, and I said, "Is Mom trying to get in touch with me from a new number?" I received a very strange text message from an unknown number in the area from where my mom lived. It turned out my mother was so convinced that this man had bugged her phone that she went to the phone store and she said, "I don't want this phone anymore. It's been bugged." The phone representative sold her a brand new phone with a brand new phone number. My mother said the damage had been done, that this man had gone on Facebook and posted lewd pictures of himself on her Facebook. I don't have Facebook. I said, Mom, can you send me a screenshot of those photos? And she said she would. But then as she tried to screenshot the photos, she said her new phone was bugged again because she was unable to take a screenshot. So I said, well, that doesn't mean your phone is bugged. Perhaps it's a different way to doing it. It's a new phone. And she was convinced that this phone too was also bugged. After that, my mom stopped talking to me as much on the phone because she was very convinced that she was being bugged and that this man was suspicious, but she didn't feel like she was getting any help from the police. She didn't want to talk about it anymore either because it was making her upset. So she said to me, no offense, but let's not talk about it anymore. And I said, yep, we don't have to talk about that, Mom. Let's talk about the kids or what you're doing. What are you having for dinner? Let's go back to talking about those things. The realtor agreed to break the contract without penalty. She was very cordial about it. She realized something was going on, but didn't know what. She did not know this man, but she did reach out to his realtor. And she asked the man's realtor who the brother was. And they gave my mom a name. Even though my mom said she didn't want to talk about it anymore, she wanted me to find out who this man was so that she could get a lawyer and go after this man for harassment and stalking. She gave me the name of who she said this brother was, and I looked him up. As I was looking him up, I saw that he did have this brother and that the brother was married. And I said, Mom, I found him. Is this the man and the wife and the brother? And I gave her their names, but I couldn't find photos of them anywhere. She told me he had taken everything off of the internet that could identify him because she was onto him. And therefore, there were no more photos on the internet. He was also running a scam, trying to raise money falsely on a GoFundMe page, and that had also since been taken down. After doing a deep dig into this person, I discovered that the person had passed away like 10 years ago. So I said, Mom, I just found out that this man had passed away like 10 years ago. She goes, no, he didn't. Then he's using a fake ID. I said, well, that's very possible. I don't know. She said he must be because those are the people and he came with them. One day, her husband stepped out to go run errands, and my mom called me on the phone. She said she hadn't been talking to me as much because her husband kept interrupting her conversation, and he was spying on her, and she did not want her conversation with me to reach his ears. She was afraid he was using it against her. And I said, well, then I want to talk to him because I don't understand what's going on here. Why would he be spying on you? And she said, because of the police. I said, what about the police? She said, because he's in cahoots with them. There's a big conspiracy going on down here. I said, a big conspiracy? What do you mean? She said, the military man, the brother that had come out to look at the house, he knew her husband. And they together had talked to the police to tell them she was crazy. It was all a big cover-up because the military man had committed a crime at the neighbor's house years ago, used her husband's father's barn to hide the evidence. I said, wow, Mom, this is a lot. How do you know all this? She goes, I found it out. I said, but who told you this? And she got very aggravated with me and accused me of not believing her. I said, Mom, I'm not saying that. I just want to know. Give me the juicy gossip here. What's going on? I said, do you want me to fly down there and help you with this? And she said, no. And I said, oh, okay. Eventually, her husband had planned a trip with his brother across the country. And I asked my mom, are you going to be okay alone? Do I need to come down? Do you want to come up here and stay with me? She said, no, I have too much work to do to get this house ready to sell. I don't need any help. I'll be fine. I said, Mom, please let me come down and help you. And she said, no. I was very worried about my mom at this point because I didn't know who this man was that was running around spying on her, stalking her. She was genuinely afraid. She really thought this man was out to get her, spying on her, going into her home. She told me that she had shut all of her curtains so he couldn't look into her house. She was also keeping the doors locked, of course, and she really didn't go anywhere, so she made sure her car was locked up in the driveway. Her husband and his brother left for their vacation. That Saturday, I spoke to her last around 10:30 in the morning. She said she had a showing and she was going to clean her house. They didn't have a new realtor. There was a friend of her husband from church that offered to show the house. So she was going to be bringing by some people to show the house. I was expecting to hear from my mother as soon as the showing ended, or perhaps the next day. She didn't call me, and I figured, I'll call her in the morning. I'm sure she's tired. She told me she's very stressed out and tired, so I'll just call her in the morning. When I woke up on Sunday, I had turned my phone off overnight. There was a missed call from Mom at 12:25 a.m. in the morning. I couldn't imagine what had happened. I tried calling her. It was around 9 o'clock. I slept in that day. There was no answer. My mother always answered. If she didn't, she would call you right back. I can't remember a time when my mother ignored my calls. I didn't know who the couple was that was going out to see the house that afternoon on that Saturday. So now things go through my mind. Could it have been the man again? What is going on? I continued to call my mother all morning. It went to voicemail. Of course, all these thoughts go through your head. Oh, great, my mother is missing. I reached out to her husband and I told him, hey, I'm sorry to bother you, but Mom appears to be missing. And he said, missing? Well, she's at home. I said, I don't know that. She's not answering her phone. He said, yeah, I noticed. She hasn't been answering her phone since yesterday morning. Over 24 hours had gone by, and he knew she wasn't answering her phone. I said, well, don't you think you should have somebody check on her? Maybe the police, do a wellness check? A neighbor, a friend? He said, well, I just thought she was resting or something. I didn't know. And I said, okay, this isn't like my mother. There's no way she's not going to call me back. I'm starting to worry. He kind of brushed me off, but he agreed to have somebody go check on her, and he was going to let me know who it was and what they found out. I waited for a while, and then finally he called and said a neighbor had gone down to the house and my mother's coffee cup was on the step, not fully drank. She also said that the doors were locked. There were curtains over every window so she couldn't look in. She banged on the door and nobody answered. The car was in the driveway and it was locked. He said he knew somebody from the gym, that they had been friends for years. And that guy, as soon as he left the gym, he was going to go check on my mother. He really was convinced that my mother was just sleeping and this was all for nothing. But my mother didn't sleep that late into the day. Sometimes she would take a nap after 3 o'clock, but there was no way she was sleeping here at noon, 1, 2. There was no way. The man from the gym met the neighbor at the house. He went around to every window, knocked. They could not see in at all. There was no answer. At this point, I told the husband, please call the police. He agreed to call the police. He remembered that there was a showing that day. He said, I'm going to call the realtor and tell her that your mom isn't there, or she could be there, but inside the house sleeping. I waited 3 or 4 hours before I heard back. The realtor went to the house with a sheriff. They got there. There was no sign of struggle. The house was immaculate. Mom wasn't there. It took a while, but after calling it in, the sheriff learned that my mother was actually at a medical center. The truck driver found her on the highway waving a broom handle, telling people that she was scared for her life, that someone was after her. An ambulance came out to where she was and took her to a medical center for evaluation. I received the call that my mother was in the hospital, that she was safe. Her phone was in the house and it was no longer charged, probably because I kept blowing it up. That evening, I got a call from her husband saying that the medical center was releasing her. They hadn't given him any information, and he said, I'm not there. I'm not even in the same state. Can you hold her until I get there? And they said no. They were sending her home in a taxi cab. I knew my mom's phone wasn't charged, but I sent her a text and said, please call me when you get this. The next day, my mother called me and explained was having trouble sleeping. She was feeling a little paranoid and scared. She thought she had seen somebody in the woods, and she ran out to get help, leaving everything in the house locked up. She ran down to the highway to flag down a trucker. I said, why didn't you call 911? She said, I was so tired I didn't even think of that. She didn't give many details about her hospital stay, just that they let her go in a taxi cab and everything was fine. I told my mom that that was really concerning, that she took off in the middle of the night and went on the highway waving a broom handle to flag down people. And if she ever feels scared, to call 911. Just put a note to yourself. Call 911. That way you don't leave the house and endanger yourself even more. She said she knew that, but it was the best option she felt she had at the time. In the heat of the moment, she felt just running away was the best option. After that phone call, my mother didn't really talk to me much anymore. For a while. She said that she just wanted to be with her husband. He was back. They had made plans. They were going to take the house off the market for a while because she felt it was stressing her out. Her husband called me, and he had gone to visit his son and said that my mother was having psychotic thoughts. She had grabbed some kind of steak knife out of the drawer, and he was afraid that she might use it. So his son said, Dad, hide all the sharps, put them in a lockbox to keep her safe and you safe. And let's go talk to a friend of mine who owns a psychiatric clinic. And they met with a doctor there, and they told him what was going on. This was not by appointment. This was because of the connection my mother's husband had with his son and the son's connection to this doctor. The doctor told them the best thing to do is get her evaluated by a licensed psychiatrist or a therapist, or if they were comfortable with it, possibly bringing her back to the hospital and telling the hospital the whole story, because at this point, no one knew anything. The hospital did not release anything to the husband or anyone else. When her husband and his son went to the house and they called me, they thought maybe I could help coax her to a psychiatrist, therapist, or go back to the hospital. My mom proceeded to tell me about a woman that had called her, and this woman was telling my mother to do bad things. She was telling my mother that she wanted my mother to get into a bathtub, pour ice cold water on herself, and that the woman was having an affair with her husband, and that this was all a big setup. It was a setup to make my mother look crazy so that the woman and her husband could be together at last. My mother didn't stay on the phone with me very long after that. She told me she had to go. The husband called and said that he knows about the woman, but he's not having an affair with anyone, that this was all something that my mom was making up. And I said, well, I don't understand how my mom could make that story up. It seems really wild to me. And he said, when she was telling me about how the woman told her to get in the bathtub and do this and that, she was telling him that the woman was in the house actually doing these things to my mother, and that she was pouring water on my mother in the bathroom. And he saw my mother pouring water on herself, all the while saying to me, the woman was on the phone telling her to do this, and to him, telling him that the woman was there next to her. At this point, I figured my mom was having some kind of mental breakdown and really needed help. I didn't hear anything after that phone call for a few days. My sister got in touch with me and asked me if I knew what happened. And I said, well, Mom was saying some strange things. That's all I know. And she said her husband and his son took her to the hospital. They took her there. She's in the hospital. She's in a psychiatric hospital. I said, okay, I didn't know this. Keep me informed. The husband kept me informed a little bit. It did seem to me that he was only telling me what he wanted me to know. I was unable to talk to her. They had visiting hours once a week and only for certain people. Her husband was on the list to visit her. He drove there to visit her about 5 days after she was admitted, and they refused to let him see her. They said that she didn't want to see him. And at this point, she was making all kinds of claims that he did this to her. When I tried to get more information out of him, he told me that he had not brought my mother to the hospital with his son, like my sister had told me. He told me that my mother called 911 on herself and had a sheriff take her. A sheriff doesn't take people to a psych ward. It's an ambulance. An ambulance will come out and take the person to the psych ward. A sheriff, as far as I know, would never risk their safety or the safety of a person and put them back in a squad car to take them to a psych ward. If you know differently, please leave me a comment. But that's as far as my knowledge goes, that an ambulance would come out. And I made him clarify that to me. Are you telling me that an ambulance didn't come out? He said, no. He said, your mom said that the FBI was out to get her. They had a picture of her dancing crazy on a table and that they were investigating it. And he said the sheriff took her. After this point, her husband got agitated with me because I was asking him questions. I reached out to a relative who knows my mom, and I asked her if, in fact, maybe there's something to this conspiracy story my mom had. This relative told me that she thought my mom had Lewy body dementia, that she had experience with Lewy body dementia working with elderly patients, and that it comes on suddenly and that they can have really strange paranoid delusional thoughts. I didn't buy that. I was like, okay, I know she was just diagnosed with Alzheimer's not too long ago, but they said it wasn't advanced and that they were going to put her on medication. Could the medication be causing this? This relative was convinced my mother had Lewy body dementia and that was it. And I said, well, has anybody diagnosed her with that though? And she said, no, not to her knowledge, but she knew that was what it was. So at that point I thought, okay, this is biased and I'm not going to listen to this until I get a full picture here of what's going on. I ran that thought by my sister, and my sister said something actually very surprising. She saw the scans. The scans did not say my mother had Alzheimer's at all. The scan said she had markers. And my understanding is that if you have markers for something, that's something you can develop later on. After my mother was in this hospital for a while, my mother wasn't eating. She was curled up in a fetal position, laying down. She refused to leave her bed, and she refused to talk to anybody. And she was not taking medication. This psychiatric center had no choice but to transfer out by ambulance to a medical center, not a psychiatric center. Once she was transferred to this medical center, I received a call from another relative. This relative told me that she spoke to my mother. And I said, well, I'm glad you got to speak to her, but what's going on? I haven't heard anything. She gave me the phone number for that hospital, and it was the room number where my mother was. I hung up with her, and I called my mother's room number. Nobody answered. I tried calling the main number. Nobody answered. Nobody ever picked up the phone, which is highly unusual. I reached out to the husband and I said, hey, I just heard that my mother is in a medical center. What is going on? And he got on the phone with me and said he was charging his phone. He couldn't talk right now. He was in the cafeteria. And when he got back to the room, he would let my mother talk to me. I said, okay. So eventually he got back on the phone and said he was on his way to the hospital room and just wanted to let me know that my mother was actually eating and that things were improving. And I said, oh, excellent. Okay. Once he got to the room, I said, put my mother on right now. I haven't spoken to her in days. I want to speak to my mother right now. He put the phone to my mother's ear and she told him to hang up on me. She knew who I was. She knew my name. She knew I was her daughter. And she told him to hang up the phone. She did not want to talk to me. I got back on the phone with him and I said, what is going on? I was able to tell my mother that I love her when he had the phone up to her ear. But other than that, I wasn't able to say anything to her. I said, what is going on here? I don't understand. Why is she mad at me? And he said, well, she's mad at me too. She's telling the doctors here that we're divorced or that I'm dead. And I said, I don't understand this. He goes, I don't either. And they're not telling me any information. In fact, they told me to go home, that they were going to put her on some new medication and wait a few days, and that I shouldn't come back until they call me with results. Over this period of time, I talked to him probably about one time, and he explained to me that they were working on the medication and that they would let him know when she improved a little bit so he could go see her. A few days later, it was a Friday. I was waiting for the phone call from him telling me he's taking mom home. I thought that's what the next step would be. Instead, I got the devastating news that the hospital was no longer interested in treating my mother and they sent her back to a psychiatric unit. He had mentioned a couple of things that I had said to him, like maybe her vitamin B12 is low, or maybe it's something to do with the MS. When the nursing and medical staff heard this at that hospital, they decided it was too late to help her, and they sent her right back to the psychiatric ward. He wasn't allowed to be there when that happened. And he said, well, which psychiatric ward did you send her? And it was a completely different one farther away. This one was 96 miles from his house. While my mom was in this new psychiatric center, he said he called, told them he's her husband, and what could he do? And they said their visiting hours were only on Wednesdays from 3 to 4, and he could not see her until then, and only if she agreed to see him. They weren't giving him any information at all about my mother. I was completely in the dark. My sister had little tidbits because when she called the hospital, they had her on file as being somebody that my mother really said you can release information to. The last thing I heard about my mother was that the hospital was evaluating her for dementia and that they were trying a new medication and that she will be there for at least another month. This was coming from my relative, my sister, and her husband. Those three people combined gave me tidbits of information, and that's what I've been able to gather up here. In addition, the husband told me that my mom isn't mad at me per se. However, while she was in the last medical unit, she told the nursing staff that my twin sister was there, and I don't have a twin sister, and that her husband had turned the twin sister against her. And therefore, she could no longer talk to me. A relative reached out to me about 9 days ago, and they were upset. They were upset that my sister and I have not been to my mother's state to visit her. And I explained that in a psychiatric hospital, you can't just show up there like a regular medical center. They don't have regular visiting hours. They might have 1 hour a week or a period of time on a weekend day. It's not a regular hospital where you can visit patients from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. It doesn't work like that. In addition, because it's a psychiatric hospital and my mother is a grown woman, she is her own voice. I explained to her husband that he may need to go to probate court and file for what they call a involuntary conservatorship of her person to make decisions for her. I also explained to him that it may be time for him to get a lawyer, and if it's too burdensome and it's too overwhelming for him, get a lawyer and they will do that for you. They will do it on your behalf, or they will become the guardian of mom. This way, he has a voice, and the hospital can't refuse to tell him anything. But as far as I know, he has not done that, and he's not willing to do that. The hospital has on record that she has one daughter. She lives states away. It's not likely that she would be able to take on this role as conservator of my mother. And I don't know that my mother would want that either. My mother never wrote out instructions. She never told me what her wishes were in the event she became incapacitated. When my relative called me explaining that she was very upset, she said when my grandmother, her mother, was sick, she was at her bedside every day in the hospital. And I get that. And many of you may be wondering, why aren't you on a plane going to see your mom? It's just not that easy. She is in a psychiatric ward. I can't even get through on the phone. I am not saying my mother is a burden. Far from that. If I was or could be right there with her, I would be doing everything I can to help her during this time. But the fact remains is she is a grown woman. She's telling her story to the hospital that there's a conspiracy and her husband is no good and he's part of it. She even told the hospital that he passed away. So the hospital is just as confused as I am at this point. I never dreamed that in her 60s, my mother would become incapacitated in a psychiatric ward. I never saw this coming, and I would not wish this on anyone. When my grandmother passed away, it was final. There was closure. When someone goes in for psychiatric care, you don't know what to expect next. There's no guidebook for what happens when the brain stops working. I'm also a mother. I have 2 children. And I'm putting myself in my mother's shoes. I'm telling this story for a couple of reasons. One is because it's such a shocking thing to have happen. I never expected this. Since this has happened to my mother, if this happened to me, what I would want for my children. This little plaque represents my childhood. It says, "Live a great story," and it shows those little blowy flowers. When I was a little girl, I remember my mother picking those blowy flowers and telling me to make a wish and blow them into the wind. When this happens, we go through a period of grief, shock, sadness, mourning. We wonder, what next? We wonder, what's in the future? What's going to happen to my mother? My mother may never come out of this. I don't know. But I'm not wasting one moment. I've done the questioning. Why? Why is this happening? I've shed the tears. My mother would say, "What did you do today? What are you working on? How's it going?" Since that fateful call, the middle of the night in July, I didn't stop living. I didn't stop the clock. I didn't sit here and mourn her. Since July, my mother had a birthday, and I wasn't able to tell her happy birthday. We all have a tree of life. I am choosing to keep living for her. I'm living my life. Or one day she may come across this video and has a lucid moment. I'm letting her know, Mom, that day changed my life forever. When you went to the hospital and they told me it's possibly dementia, which may be lifelong and you may never recover, I finished writing my first book. I started a YouTube channel. I took action with my health. And your words played a part in getting help other than the traditional medical doctors that I have been seeing. I'm now seeing a holistic healer. And I'm doing better, Mom. Mom, this year I was able to grow grapes in my garden for the first time. I left them for the wildlife, of course, just like you did for the deer. Mom, you're going to love this one. I went down to the basement. My tuxedo kitty tore up all my anti-fatigue mats. I know if I were talking to you right now, Mom, you would be laughing hysterically. And that silly little cat tore them up. She shredded them, Mom. Mom, your granddaughter got her driver's license the first try. Mom, your grandson is in his second year of college. Mom, your granddaughter, and she is in her first year of college. Mom, the Black-Eyed Susans came back for the first time in 20 years. They're back in abundance all over my yard. Mom, I learned how to make clam chowder the right way with the clear broth and the pork salt we talked about that I couldn't find at the grocery store. I found it. Mom, I stopped going to the hairdresser that butchered my hair last time, and I learned how to trim my own bangs. It's not perfect. Mom, I started lifting weights, and I'm doing much better. I'm physically stronger. I'm getting stuff done in my yard, and I know it would make you proud. Mom, I never gave up on you. Mom, I never gave up on you. I think about you every day, and I put my heart and soul in everything I do. And I'm creating legacy for my children. So that if anything like this ever happened to me, they would have gotten the best version of me. Just like I did you, before this happened to you. Mom, I've been going on hikes again, down by the beach, where we used to go scalloping and clamming. Mom, I miss you. I miss our talks every day. I miss hearing your voice. I hope this is temporary, Mom. Happy birthday, Mom.